Director Dr. Somkit Lit Paitun, Jan Prapat, Director of the Center for ASEAN Studies, Kun Manat Sawi, Deputy Permanent Secretary, becoming an apologist for the new regime, distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor for me to return to a stage still talking about emerging ASEAN. I have looked at the program, and every topic is emerging. I hope we are not going to be emerging forever. But indeed, ASEAN is now 65 years old. It was established in 1967, August 8th, when the region was very much divided and, in fact, struggling to become a unit of countries with its own identity on the global landscape. It was about a decade after a major international global conference at Bandung, Indonesia. You remember that Afro-Asian conference, when the leaders of the emerging world converged on the city of Bandung and agreed among themselves that indeed the emerging, developing third world would need a stage for itself to address its own problems and to strategize a way forward on another emerging landscape, the world post-World War II. ASEAN, or the countries of ASEAN, also emerging out of its own colonial background, except Thailand, had wanted a smaller stage for ourselves in our region, upon which our identities would not be overshadowed by, at that time, the giants of the third world. People like Zhou Enlai from emerging China, people like Nehru from emerging India, people like Sukarno himself from emerging Indonesia, and from far away, Africa, Eastern Europe, they all converge on the city of Bandung. So ASEAN wanted, or leaders of ASEAN at that time, 5 of them wanted something small, comfortable, and relatively conducive to discuss regional affairs, keeping our own identities, and at the same time being able to forge ahead on this new landscape emerging called the third world. So from the very beginning, ASEAN was forced to come together by necessity, with all the pressures coming in from every direction. We would need to stand our own within the crosswind, cross-pressure of global politics at that particular time. The only one founding father of ASEAN who is still alive is celebrating his 100th anniversary this year. And he was the host on the 7th and 8th of August, 1967, Dr. Tanat Korman. The rest have left the world. And I think they are looking back to us who have inherited this great idea and great vision of what we are doing, what we are trying to achieve, and where we are going with this torch of hope called ASEAN. Well, in the 80s, I heard Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong, Professor Simon Tay, in New York, talking in the 90s, talking about the oxygen of foreign foreign direct investment has been sucked out of Southeast Asia because of the emergence of China, because of the emergence of India. The oxygen of direct foreign investment, or foreign direct investment, FDI, has been sucked out of Southeast Asia. For ASEAN to survive economically, our leaders had decided that we need to attract this oxygen of direct foreign investment back to ASEAN. But we could not do it individually. We could not do it country by country. We would not be attractive enough. Therefore, the idea of ASEAN community emerged again. And since then, we have been working on this vision. And we have come up with mechanisms, statements, declarations. We have quickened the pace of ASEAN community from 2020 to 2050. Because we realize, all of us, that individually we would not be able to compete. Collectively, we would have hope to stand against the competition from outside. So the idea of the ASEAN community came into being. Yes, we have continued to achieve certain milestones the ASEAN way, meaning not very clear, not in the letters, not in black and whites, not in the form of contracts and obligations, but in the form of evolving ASEAN spirit, ASEAN vision, and ASEAN way of doing things. So much so that the Lady Secretary of State of the United States, second one, Hillary Rothman Clinton, I think Dr. Chomsak was in that room with me in February 2009. When she made the first trip outside of the US and decided to come to East Asia, against the traditional US practice of crossing the Atlantic to the capitals of Europe, of all Europe. She came to Japan, she came to Korea, she came to China. She decided to come to Jakarta, and she decided to come to visit the Secretariat of ASEAN. And with the understanding, with the knowledge, with the briefing that she had received before coming to us, that the ASEAN countries will behave like the ASEAN countries. They have this charter, but we don't know whether they're going to implement it or not. And she asked me very politely, this little green book, Mr. Secretary General, how much you intend to put it into practice? I turned to Dr. Chomsak for his help, how to answer this question. And Dr. Chomsak said, I don't know. So I mustered my courage, drew upon my own background training, and politely respond to her question. Madam Secretary, we must make this little green book into a living document so that successive generations of ASEAN would find it inspirational in their own struggle to make ASEAN a real ASEAN into an ASEAN that would be standing in the world, being respected and delivering the hopes and the aspirations for all people of ASEAN. And I said, much like your Declaration of Independence, when Thomas Jefferson penned that very inspiring phrase, all men are created equal, endowed with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I said it was not equal in the beginning. It was aspirational. It was a vision. It was an expression of hope based on an earlier European theory that men and women came out of the state of nature, where life was solitary, nasty, brutish, and short hops, to come into a civil society, to work together in order to live in peace and in prosperity, equally. Every successive generation of the American people appealed to this document, particularly this phrase, whether it's Abraham Lincoln, whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's various other human or civil rights fighters. All men are created equal. Woman was not included in that phrase. And I said, now, your boss is in the White House. He was not included in all men are created equal. And now, Madam, you are Secretary of State. You were not given votes until 1920s in the United States. But every successive generation of American people would appeal to that document and expand their own space and struggle for their own meaning in life, so that that document has become the foundation of your society. When I finished, Mrs. Clinton said, "Yes, Professor." So now we have come to a new juncture of the world. Politically, security, strategically, the global institutions are looking for regional organizations to help achieve various goals that together 7 billion human beings aspire to achieve. Out of the Second World War, when ASEAN was born, it was a bipolar world. Free world and the world of communism. Toward the end of the 80s, early 90s, that two worlds crumbled with the Berlin Wall. Now it is a multipolar world, but the challenge is there's no multilateralism to sustain it. You look around, the UN is in shambles. You look around, NATO is looking for a purpose, a place to fight. You look around, global institutions are not doing their jobs as they used to. So we are going back to the Charter of the UN, a very, very small phrase, saying that all these arrangements into this new organization called the United Nations, all these arrangements are not going to prejudice, are not going to overshadow, are not going to replace something the UN Charter calls regional arrangements. Regional arrangements means regional organizations. But at that time, the phrase regional organizations did not exist. So the UN Charter refers to it, or referred to it at that time, in a very, very vague phrase: regional arrangements. ASEAN is one. The countries of ASEAN are trying to achieve one, and that one is our own regional arrangements here in Southeast Asia. So, on strategic, political, and security issues, we are expected to refine our own regional arrangements, to sustain, to resolve, and to manage the challenges here in the region. We have the problem of the South China Sea to manage. We have problems of territorial disputes among ourselves to resolve, to manage. We have problems of disparity among our own membership. The most prosperous is more than $50,000 per head per year, or per capita, Singapore. the least or the poorest, still less than $2 a day. How do you manage that gap? When Kennedy said, "A house divided cannot stand." This is our regional challenge that ASEAN is being called upon to manage through our own regional arrangements. Only 3 countries in ASEAN have made it to what we call the high-income category. Singapore first, Brunei second, and I think only recently Malaysia. The vision was 2020 Malaysia would be a high-income country, but I think Malaysia has done it. If you look at the PPP, power purchasing parity, $1 in Malaysia would be able to buy equal to more than $10,000 a year per head. The rest of us are at risk of being stuck in what we call the middle income trap. Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines are at risk of being stuck there. And the rest are emerging from the bottom, trying to be in the middle income, trying to be in the middle income or higher middle income, but far away from the high income country category. How are we going to manage that? As a region, economically speaking, we are still dependent on resources from outside. As a region, science, technology, we still depend on resources from outside. As a region, 10 countries, 600 million, we are still dependent on the management skills from outside. As a region, 600 million, we still produce for export, for markets outside our own region. And these are the challenges economically that we have to manage too. That 600 million shall be 600 millions consuming ASEAN products. Not 600 millions producing products and services to be exported outside of ASEAN. All of us are exporting economies, producing for others, using others' capital to invest, dependent on others' science and technology to power, to propel those factories. And in the end, other markets to consume and to use our products and our services. ASEAN will be emerging forever if we don't change this modality. Director said this morning it's a more than 2 trillion economy combined, GDP. Trade among us is higher than that. Trade among us, I mean, combined trade of the 10 countries is higher than 2.2 or 2.3 trillion US dollars a year. But here's the catch. Of 2.2, 2.3 trillion that we trade among ourselves, 10 countries, only 25% of that. So about 500 billion US dollars out of 2.2, 2.3 trillion US dollars, 24, 25% we trade among the 10 of us. And among the 10 of us, it's Thailand, Malaysia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia. The rest are not yet in this trade connectivity among ourselves. Vietnam produce for outside market. The Philippines produce for outside market. Thailand produce for outside market. Not yet for ASEAN market. So what to do for the economic community of ASEAN to be viable, to be strong, to be competitive, to be productive, to draw synergy from each other, to open up the landscape for each other? We need to cross borders to invest in each other. And for that, we have not been doing that much. Therefore, we are still emerging. Potential is there. So we have to have policy and projects and programs that would attract Thai investment into Indonesia, Indonesian investment into the Philippines, Philippines investment into Vietnam, Vietnam investment into Myanmar, the rest of us crisscrossing our borders. Same landscape, same rules, same regulations. That's what we have to do. We have to increase 24-25% trade among ourselves to the figure higher and higher and higher. NAFTA, Canada, US, Mexico, 68-70% among the three of them, nobody else. Less than 40 with the world. The EU, 28 countries, 78, 80% among 28 of them. The rest, they trade with the world. ASEAN will have to increase and increase that figure rather quickly. Otherwise, our economic community will be emerging. We will not be an actual market, actual community. For security, for political, for strategic arrangements that the Deputy Permanent Secretary mentioned, and we have made headway, ARF. In fact, it was in this very hotel in 1994, ARF was born. Right here. ASEAN Regional Forum. Professor Carolina Hernandez, you remember that. But for the strategic, political, and security challenges to be managed, we are now expected to come up with our own norms, our own institutions, our own processes, in order to address the instability, the potential of clashes, and the prospect of confrontation among us here in the region. Henry Kissinger said at the end of last century, East Asia, as far as economic prosperity, economic growth, technological advance, innovation, Henry Kissinger said, East Asia is equivalent to 20th century Europe. That was the year at the end of the 20th century. But he said, as far as institutions, processes, and systems to manage their own problems and potential conflicts among themselves, many fault lines among the countries of East Asia. Look at the Chinese and the Japanese now. Look at the Koreans and the Japanese now. Look at the Koreans and the Koreans now. ASEAN and China now. Henry Kissinger observed potential flashpoints are all over the landscape of East Asia, but they don't have the institutions, they don't have the system, they don't have the process to manage those things. They are still 19th century Europe. So, for the economic community to be sustained, for the socio-cultural community to be vibrant, creative, knowing each other, learning about each other, appreciating each other, respecting diversity among ourselves, we need that stability, that security, and that strategic new balance for ourselves here in the region in the face of the multilateral world. Without multilateralism to sustain it, we need to depend on our own regional arrangements. And I'm not sure if we all are putting all our efforts equally to come up with that political security community, the first one in our charter. For economic community to be viable, our people must appreciate the diversity that we have among us. This is 4% of the global surface called ASEAN, Southeast Asia. 4% of the global surface. But with all the diversity that exists in the world, more. Largest Muslim country is Indonesia. The only Christian Catholic country in entire East Asia or Asia is the Philippines. Languages, ethnicity, cultures, norms, values, religions. This is 4% of the first surface of the earth that is most diversified. How are we going to manage that diversity? Well, socio-cultural. Sorry, so many other calls coming in, wanting me to stop, I guess. So that's the challenge. And I believe that the socio-cultural pillar and community is probably the most challenging for all of us. Because without learning to live with each other, without learning to work with each other, without accommodating each other's diversities and differences, it is difficult to agree on bigger things in the strategic, political, and security area. It would be difficult to appreciate and to accommodate each other in the economic area. But it's been given least attention. Socio-cultural, education, health, environment, youth, sports, culture, arts. What else? I came into ASEAN in early 2008, and the charter said this shall be an organization with the people in mind, people-oriented organization. I went into the secretariat. Civil society in Jakarta wanted to have a conference on human rights. And they asked the new Secretary General to come and address the beginning, opening. I was set to go, but member states told me, Mr. Secretary General, slow down. Because we at ASEAN have not even agreed on the Declaration of Human Rights, on the mechanism of human rights, even though it's in the Charter. And I said, for heaven's sake, if you are not ready, at least give the space to the Secretary General. Because otherwise, it would look like we are not quite committed to what we are saying. Later on, Thailand, if you remember, Mr. Deputy Secretary General Manatsui, later on, Thailand organized the summit in 2009, I believe, in Hua Hin, and it was the first time that representatives of the civil society were invited, in 10 of them, to sit in front of the 10 leaders of ASEAN. And one leader turned to me and said, Surin, this is going to be a chaos. I said, why, Excellency? Why chaos? These are civil society. They are civil. You know what I was told? Then you were there. Then Kasit. I was told, yes, Mr. Secretary General, you can deal with the civil society, but they have to be our civil society. Meaning we have to choose them, we have to fund them, we have to give them policy to do what they want to do, rather than independent civil society. I said, Excellency, civil society is civil society. You can't say that they have to be your civil society. Well, unless you have the people into the process, it's going to be difficult to have that ASEAN community. So let me open up my heart, now that I have left about 2 years the position. 6 months after, at the Secretariat in Jakarta, I have made my decision that I would not accomplish much sitting at the Secretariat. And Kun Termsak knew this. I decided to take ASEAN out to the world and drum up the vision of ASEAN and beat up the gong of optimism for ASEAN. That these 10 countries know what they are doing, we know what we want to achieve, we know by the year 2015 we will be a community, economic community, political community, socio-cultural community. We will be one. The whole world was excited about the prospect of ASEAN being one. With all the potentiality, with all the bargaining power, with all the attractions of being one ASEAN. If you have noticed, the excitement of achieving one ASEAN, one identity, one community had been very, very strong. Now, a conference like this, all over the landscape, every capital of ASEAN will have to address that issue. How to get 600 million people excited about this vision. And how to keep the world interested in this project, in this mission, in this vision of ours. We cannot afford for the world to make that verdict that ASEAN is not going anywhere soon. First of January 2015, Malaysia is going to assume the chairmanship of ASEAN. Those from Malaysia, please take note. And for the first time in 3 years, a founding member of ASEAN will assume the chairmanship of ASEAN. The world has been waiting for the last 3 years, and I'm not saying that the last 3 years ASEAN has done nothing, achieved nothing. But for the first time in 3 years, ASEAN would be chaired by a founding member of ASEAN since 1967. So it's going to be a fateful year for ASEAN. It's going to be a very decisive year for ASEAN. it is going to be a very critical turning point for ASEAN next year. We have made our commitment to the world and to our people. 2015, we shall enter into a new arrangement here in Southeast Asia called the ASEAN Community. We don't have much time left. And the world is watching, and the people are waiting. And each of us will have to make our own commitment to make sure that 2015 is the year of delivery, not a year of emergence of ASEAN. And I know you realize this, all of you. And I hope that the scholars here in the front row, some of you are ASEAN optimists. Simon Tay is one, I think. You've been talking about this for a long, long time, Professor Simon Tay. Certainly, Professor Jauhar Hassan, certainly Professor Carolina Hernandez, and the rest of you, Surachai. Some of you are optimists of ASEAN. Many of you are probably cautious about ASEAN. And maybe there are even some who are ASEAN pessimists. I am still an ASEAN optimist. I am still a leading cheerleader of ASEAN. I am still trying to impress upon people around the world that ASEAN is a viable proposition. And I think they want us to succeed. I think they are hoping that we will succeed. I think they believe in our potentiality, that if you succeed, we too will benefit. It is up to us, 600 million of us, to deliver next year. Whether it is an ASEAN full of conditions, or it is an ASEAN full of still energy and optimism, or is it going to be an ASEAN that would remain a potentiality, emerging into the future? I know we can do it. I do my part. I'm sure you'll do your part. Good luck turning emerging ASEAN into the reality of ASEAN. Thank you very much.